This podcast is part of the Midwest Podcast Network. Find out more about our other shows and how to support our network at MidwestPodcastNetwork.com. Welcome to Gone to Texas, a podcast about AMC's Preacher. My name is Alex, and I have not read any of Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon's Preacher.
And I am Nick, and I have read all of it, The Preacher.
Yes. Today we're going to be discussing Season 2, Episodes 1 and 2 of the series titled On the Road and Mumbai Sky Tower, respectively. While we will not be spoiling any of the comic and, by extension, any future plot lines of the show, we will be discussing the details of the series through Season 2, Episode 2, so pause this and go watch the show before you listen to the rest of this episode. You can find more episodes of our podcast at g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. We're also G2T Podcast on Twitter, and you can send feedback to g2tpodcast@gmail.com to tell us what you think of our podcast and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Preacher or our podcast. Please let us know if there are spoilers in the subject, because I will pass it along to Nick, and I will not read it in that case. Comic spoilers.
Yes.
Not much listener feedback, except Jason wrote in to let us know he's excited for Preacher Season 2, and he's excited for Gone to Texas Season 2. So thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
We're excited to have you along. But we'd like to hear more from everybody, so hopefully this episode being out there inspires you guys to write into us. That's g2tpodcast@gmail.com once again.
Yes, I hope Bruce and everybody else are still out there.
Yeah, we haven't heard from Bruce as of yet, but hopefully we start getting some of people's thoughts on the show. Nick, welcome back. I recorded a little primer without you last week.
I listened to it.
Yeah.
I just shook my head the whole time. Yes, it's great to be back.
Not enough comic book reader knowledge.
It's great to be...
Yeah, I guess we should say, just
to
catch people up in case they didn't notice. I don't know how they wouldn't notice, because I definitely co-opted the feed for this show, but we did a similar thing for Westworld called Westworld FM.
Yep.
When that was airing back in October. But since then, we haven't really been podcasting too much together. We had a Film Nerds episode.
I literally have not seen Alex since the finale of Gone to Texas. We did that remotely.
Yeah.
How have you been? How's your year been?
No, he's lying.
That's true.
But
it's true. That's false.
Last time we were doing Gone to Texas, Film Nerds was still going on.
It was, and I re-listened to prime myself for this.
Yeah.
I went back and listened to our episode 10 episode and our season wrap-up, and I really meant to listen to... I didn't mean to listen to our whole show, because that sounds a little self-indulgent.
It's kind of hard to want to do that by the end of the season, like after you've seen all of the show.
Yeah, it is. I like going back sometimes and listening to our previous stuff, because I like to know how we did. And it was good to come back to revisit it after some time passed. So I definitely left listening to those two episodes with a lot of notes on how to be even better this season.
Yeah.
Which I think is productive, but also it was a good way to catch me up on not only what happened, but how I felt at the time.
Yeah.
Because I have a really weird memory, and as I was listening to it, I was like, I forgot I had all these opinions. And it's good to kind of, tap back into that and get back into that mindset of leaving that season, because it's such a good season.
For sure.
And this season is shaping up to be pretty cool also.
Yeah.
And it's also shaping up to be kind of scary, because now we're in the books.
Yeah, you're in the territory.
We're in the shit.
Yeah.
Oh,
I went back and listened a little bit to the season, or the episode 10 recap episode, and I was very disappointed in how much recapping I was doing, especially because by the end of Westworld, I kind of figured out a little bit more about how to keep the recapping concise and make the discussion the more prevalent part of the show.
Yes.
So hopefully I've applied that knowledge here, and people will enjoy it. If you want more recap or less recap, please let me know, and we can figure out the right balance for our listeners. But with all that said, we'll talk about Season 2, Episode 1, titled On the Road. The teaser picks up with the crew on the road, headed to see Jesse's old family friend Mike, and they get into a car chase with some cops who see them speeding along, and they subsequently get pulled over by these cops because they can't quite get away. Jesse utilizes Genesis to get away from the cops, but not before the Saint of Killers starts shooting up all of the people that are on the road. So,
yes,
opening scene of the second season. Any general thoughts here? Like, what did you think about it as an opening to the how this, like, a tonal opening to the season?
I thought it was good. I must have thought it was good because I don't have any notes on the episode until about halfway through the episode. Yeah. So I think I was kind of along for the ride. Yeah, in more ways than one.
Yeah.
It is. I watched it. So I listened to our 2 previous episodes between watching episode 1 and episode 2.
Yeah.
Had I listened to our episodes before episode 1, it probably would have been even more jarring. But it's going to be a very different show, and we said that ad nauseum at the end of last season. But it's going to be a very different show.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, I was like, we're not going to have a lot of permanence in this season. I don't think we'll ever stay in one place for too long, unless they start to get to a certain arc in the books that does happen pretty early. And if they do that, it'll probably be the second half of this season. But they haven't released those episode names yet, so I was already trying to look ahead and divine what might be coming. But I don't think we'll have a lot of locations that the guys will hunker down in for very long. I don't think we'll have a lot of characters that will become mainstays, which is part of what's going to make this season such a stark contrast to season 1, is we spent that whole season with the same characters.
Yeah.
Like in watching modern TV shows, you were kind of conditioned to see these same people. So when this one started, I already kind of was carrying with me like Odin and Arseface, or I guess I should call him Eugene. They don't really call him Arseface in the show. And Sheriff Root and the Loaches and all these and Miles and all these people we got to know in season 1. And I was like, oh, but they're gone. And spoilers for season 1, they gone.
And we put that spoiler alert up front.
And they're not coming back. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm gonna miss Odin. I'm gonna miss these. Eugene is coming back.
Eugene is coming back. Yes. Ian Coletti's name is in the opening credits of both of these episodes. Yet he's not.
He's not in either one.
Yeah.
Which is just a very interesting thing to get used to, and it puts me in a funny place as a fan of the comics because, again, as we said, and we're probably going to repeat a lot of stuff that we said at the end of season 1, but this is just a transition, so to speak. As a fan of the books, if the show had started with this season, it probably would have been okay. I would have been fine, but I think other people would have been a little bit. It's a big ask of your audience to just grab your hand, to grab Seth Rogen's hand and leap into the unknown with him.
Yeah.
It's a big ask. So it is really cool what they did with season 1, making it issue 0, as you called it, which I thought was really good. And kind of introducing us to this world and these characters and laying the groundwork for what's to come, which I think was great. I think we got a fair amount of development of all 3 leads in season 1.
Yeah.
Obviously, we got a ton with Jesse, and we got a lot with Tulip, and we get a little bit in Cassidy, but it's mostly development that he undergoes with those characters, or it's hinted at. And that kind of continues in this new season. And it's early, and maybe I should just talk about this later, but I'm already a little bit dissatisfied with the amount of attention Cassidy's getting.
Yeah.
However, he doesn't get a lot of development until later in the books.
Okay.
So I guess we're probably par for the course.
We might be on par for what you've read in the books, but
right, which is kind of essential to his character in a way.
Yeah,
you're supposed to take him mostly at face value, and then things kind of turn on their head a little bit, and you suddenly realize you want to know a lot more about this guy you didn't necessarily know that you wanted to know more about.
And I can see that coming. Cassidy for me is still kind of the standout, and like he's the one that I want to keep my eyes on and see what he's doing all of the time and just drink in his performance because Joseph Gilgan is so fantastically wacky in the role in a show where like he probably brings like 40% of the wackiness that's going on here because the rest of it's all Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg pretty much.
Yes.
But
and Lance and I were talking about friend of the show and co-host of the show, or a guest of the show, Lance, who is also a fan and has read all of it. He and I were talking about Joe Gilgan's performance and exactly how he just nails it on every front. And obviously part of the credit needs to go to the writers of the show because they get that he gets it and they get it. So they work together to do a really, really pitch perfect adaptation of Cassidy, and he's disarming and fun, and you get in his corner, but you don't know why, because if you objectively look at Cassidy, you're like, I should not root for this guy.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about him.
Mm-hmm.
He's clearly dangerous. He's a vampire, and he's a drug addict and kind of just a maniac.
For sure.
Yet you just love him.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Absolutely. I liked the teaser. I don't want to say that I loved it. The certain elements, like you immediately get reminded this is a Seth Rogen joint by Cassidy's proselytizing about foreskin and certain facial creams and stuff like that.
Yes.
So you're immediately like, okay, I'm in the car with Seth Rogen driving right now. But then the way that the show, like as the chase begins to start, we see this artificial kind of old film and overexposure effect take place during that chase. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain about it a little bit as somebody who's more technically into the film field. I personally wasn't a huge fan of it because while I'm like, all right, I get what they're going for here, I feel like for some reason it made the green screen in the car pop out a lot more, and it kind of took me out of the show.
It's almost like when you watched Planet Terror and the fake movie grain called more attention to the effects.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't necessarily know why that is. Maybe just messing with the lighting that much, which is a very delicate thing to do on a green screen, just completely throws it out of whack. But I don't know if that's something that they could have adjusted for and fixed. What did you think about their use of that effect? I mean, it's probably just meant to be like, look, this is fun. It's a Dukes of Hazzard style, car chase going on. But
I'm glad that you are actually talking about what happened in the episode, because I just realized that everything I said prior has nothing to do with the opening scene. So
that's okay.
As always, thanks for grabbing the ship's wheel and going,
yep.
Now hold on.
Yep.
We're going to the new world here. I didn't like that at first because I thought it was really unmotivated.
Yeah.
And I still don't really understand why they did it. I think the only thing I can think of that kind of made sense to me is, I think in that moment, in that scene when you're with the three of them, this moment where they all are jiving and their course is clear and they all know where they stand with each other and all of their roles are clearly defined. I think this would be the kind of time capsule moment that if you were these people and you were the friends, you would look back and say those were the good old days. So there's a point in the book early on, and this may happen yet, but this isn't really a spoiler. They take a Polaroid together, the three of them.
Yeah.
And it's very much that moment of here we are having a great time together, the three of us, and life is grand and everybody's happy. And Cassidy is best friends with Jesse, and Jesse's in love with Tulip, and everything's just great. And that Polaroid is a really cool moment that happens pretty early on in the series.
Yeah.
It's probably issue 12, maybe a little bit earlier. I'm trying to remember because there's a pretty substantial arc that happens early, but I think it's oddly spaced. Anyway, I kind of think this is almost the representation of that moment. And that grain is kind of, I think, to me, a little evocative of a home movie or kind of a fun look back on this.
That makes sense.
That's the only thing I can think of. And I'm only saying that because I have knowledge of that scene from the book.
Part of me wonders if it was more of we want to make this chase scene pop, but we also don't want to blow our budget.
Well, here's the thing. They had an awesome car sequence in season 1 with Tulip in the car through the cornfield.
Yeah.
And that the budget of this scene I can't think was too high. I mean, they flipped some cars and they drove through a construction site. It wasn't anything crazy.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought initially it was unmotivated. But the more I was thinking about it, I was like, that was just my personal kind of theory that I'm carrying into with me.
And I think
because
it could totally apply.
Yeah, that's one of those memories where you and I have 1,000 memories. We can just remember stupid stuff like
Vivid
that
detail,
in the car,
yeah.
Singing along to Come On Eileen when you were just talking about what they do with foreskins. It's very much a conversation you have with your buddies when you're all 22 years old.
Yep.
Or maybe if you're a normal person, it's when you're younger because you're more serious than we are. But that's kind of what it made me think of, because then it as soon as it ends, the scene, the chase scene ends, that kind of fades away.
Yeah, yeah. It as soon as they get you get that jarring. The cop pulls Jesse out of the car and slams him on the hood, and it's gone as soon as the cut happens. So I mean, I didn't really love it, but I'm not like it didn't ruin anything for me, I guess.
Sure.
It was just weird to me that like I believed all of the green screen up until that moment, and then it just really took me out of it. Other than that, we've got Jesse using Genesis, the first use of Genesis in the season here. And Tulip's kind of noted disgust or protest. She kind of thinks it makes things too easy. It's not fun anymore, essentially, is what she says.
Yeah.
Which I think it'll be. I think it'll be more important. She seems like a little bit of the moral conscience of using Genesis, but also kind of weirdly with her own motivations of like it's not fun.
Yeah, I think that's kind of her disguise. Saying
although
it's not
I guess
fun.
And this is exactly like this
kind of masking
it comes
her.
up later on in the episode that she kind of has a more moral problem with the issue, and
because
that
she's been on
it's an invasion of somebody.
She's been on the receiving end of it,
yes,
so she knows.
Yeah, and Jesse clearly hasn't. But Saint Killer shows up.
Yep,
first real big bloodbath other than
the bar,
his bar in the first season. What'd you think about the Saint?
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah,
it's pretty sweet. The only thing that
sounds like he's firing cannonballs.
Right,
and he's just got a handgun, and that's
really
awesome.
The only two things about it that I didn't like is I was like, how are they hitting the ground like mortars?
Yeah,
like that didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I was like, this seems unnecessary. And the only other thing I didn't really love was just how he was not in the scene. He was like super far away.
Yeah,
that's okay because it establishes the danger of him, that he will shoot you from a mile away with a revolver.
Yep.
But at the same time, I kind of want him to be up in there because most of the really sweet panels from the book are he's just in the thick of it, and you just see all these people's reactions to what's happening to them, what's happening to people around them, and then him because he's this like enormous hulking guy in a cowboy hat.
Yeah,
and he's just great. Graham McTavish is a really cool casting choice. His beard is still weird to me.
Yeah.
Which is strange for me to say because usually I'm down for a beard on any character.
Yeah.
Like there was an album I saw online once of all superheroes that people added beards onto, and it was the best. And
the Batman with the beard just growing out of the cowl.
Yeah,
is
and it's got the slightly curled, almost Ra's al Ghul-ish.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Or like the Cyclops with the mustache. Oh man, it's awesome. Facial hair usually enhances all these characters.
So but in the book, the Saint is he clean shaven?
He is clean shaven.
Or kind of?
No, he's clean shaven.
Okay.
And there's something about that jaw and that the only hair is his actual hair in his head, that long, lank hair. They really nail that in the show.
Yeah.
But something about his jawline feels disruptive to me now, which is a really I fully acknowledge it's a weird thing for me to be critiquing. But when you see him in the book, you can. He always has that. He has this like hilarious like perma scowl on his face. He always just has this sneer on his face, and part of it is Dylan face.
Yeah.
By nature of what it is, there's always some sort of facial scrunching happening. Yeah. But the Saint always has this look on his face. You just Google like Saint of Killer. Like basically, if you saved a bunch of actually, I know this is true now because I went on when I was reading Preacher initially on my iPad. I was screenshotting a lot of the panels to like refer back to them later. And with one of the newer iOS updates, you know how it catalogs faces? Well, get this. So I was going through my iPad today, and I saw like my face, and I don't have a lot of pictures on my iPad. They're mostly panels or like articles I've been reading. So there's like my face, and there's like 5 photos, and you click on it, and it gathers the photos of your face.
Yeah.
I saw one of Jesse Custer, and I laughed, and I clicked on it, and it wasn't just Jesse Custer. It was him and like the Saint of Killers and like Cassidy. Pretty much anyone that Steve Dillon drew was just Apple understood it to be one person.
Computers acknowledge that Dylan face is the thing. we have computational evidence.
It is awesome. I was really happy to find that. But if you just Google the Saint of Killers from the book, you'll see that he's pretty much always making the same expression, and it's great. But something about the way they show him in the show, with the shadow from the brim of his hat and the combination of the facial hair, kind of hides that face, which is okay. It's a different interpretation. It's a TV show, but I really used to look forward to when he was coming in the book. You would know, and then whenever he was finally revealed, I would just like laugh and want to fist pump and cheer, because whenever he shows up, it's great.
Yeah.
And he always has that same look on his face, and it's just awesome. So that's one of my only other critiques about the Stand of Killer's arrival. He's always like, in the show, they're really hiding him. They're trying to keep him really mysterious.
Yeah.
And not humanize him, which is kind of what they're doing with Cassidy. Like, Cassidy very rarely has his sunglasses on in the show. Yep. And you actually mentioned in the wrap-up of season 1 that I was excited when you put on the red sunglasses, because that's his thing. And I get it. He's a main character in the show. He's on the side of the good guys. Actors need eyes to emote and to make connections with other characters. I get that. But you don't have to worry about that with the Stand of Killers. Like, show his face. That's fine, because you will never humanize this thing, because he's not human. They literally say that. He's
a monster.
Yeah. He's a force of nature. He's a hurricane. And so just show him. Like, I want to see a little bit more of him. They keep hiding him. So anyway, but other than that, him shooting through cars and I like that they're putting the impact of his bullets on display with people like flying.
Yeah, and just exploding upon contact.
Which is exactly how it should be. Yeah, it should be ludicrous, and it is so far, which is great.
That's good.
But Jesse's use of the word in that scene was, he uses it very questionably in the book sometimes. Yeah. And Tulip's reaction to a lot of it is kind of how I felt while watching it. I was kind of like, ooh, this is kind of mean. Like, making the guy recite the Yellow Rose of Texas. Yep. I was and
the man that he makes the chief like mace his own testicles essentially. So that, like, even that is just kind of like,
yeah, you chuckle at first, and then when the reality of it sets in, that they will literally never stop until he tells them to. Which is a big thing that happens in the book. Anyone who has read the book will know exactly what I'm talking about. He does something like that in the book, and it will stick with you with what happens. And I kind of hope that scene happens in the show, because it's so awesome.
We might be building there with Tulip's moral questioning of things.
Right. Anyway.
Yeah.
Santa Killers is great. I'm glad that they call them Santa Killers now, and that we can say that.
And yeah, I don't know that there's too much else on the teaser, but we can kind of move on here. So the first act, after the next commercial break, Tulip pulls off to a gas station to wash out the intestine taste from her mouth, because she used intestines to siphon gas into the car. And then Jesse uses Genesis to get the gas station attendant to forget that they were there, and he discovers a large caliber bullet that burns his hand when he touches it. Cassidy heals up, and as they leave, the Saint of Killers shows up to ask where the preacher was headed, but the attendant can't tell him, so he rips out the attendant's tongue.
Yes.
So the intestines, you were crazy.
Yeah, that was too much. That was a little too far for me.
The intestine flapping behind the car to me was kind of, it almost annoyed me. Like I was just kind of like,
yeah, it was a. Usually, even the toilet humor in this show, it has an edge of sophistication to it, and I was like, that is just kind of gory, and I'm not against gore, but it just, I don't know, it just felt kind of gross. I didn't think that really was necessary.
And I saw a few commercials and trailers and things for this, which I typically try not to watch, but I remember seeing Tulip with the mouth on her face, or with the mouth on her face. Yeah,
the blood.
She certainly has a mouth on her face, but the blood that's around her mouth, and I remember thinking, man, how does that happen? Yeah. And then for it to just happen during a commercial break.
Right. And in such a nasty way. I mean, I don't know what it's trying to say about Tulip. Her willingness to go the extra mile and use intestines to siphon gas out of a car somehow amidst explosions and stuff. But it kind of crossed a weird line where it like Cassidy would do that, and he'd be cool with it because he's eaten flesh. Yep. But for her, it was just kind of, it was a little, it didn't seem like something, it seemed out of character for Tulip.
A little bit, yeah.
And the only time it really paid off was when Cassidy told her that Yoo-hoo and hot sauce are the combination to get the taste of flesh out of your mouth.
Yeah, it's an adorable little scene, especially.
Yeah, but it's not worth it. I just was kind of like, that was wasted time in the episode already. Just like, how about the cop just did it when Jesse asked him to, and there was enough gas to get away. Like, there you go. You've already explained away what happened.
They just had to find Cassidy and like get out of there, essentially.
We forgot to mention Cassidy under the SUV was really good. Yeah, I think it's kind of an essential thing in like action sequences where the main characters do not have the upper hand, that you got to put some sort of ticking clock on it. And that was a really good way for him, that he just had to stand there and just watching him shimmy, knowing that was going on in the background was really funny.
And some of his resourcefulness of putting the man's head as like a stopper block on the wheel, but that failing and I liked it. It added a layer to the scene that I thought was really good. It's like what I said earlier of wanting to watch Cassidy the whole time.
Right.
Like he's always got something going on.
Yes.
So.
And then we'll come back to that.
Yes,
too
we will. The bullet burning Jesse's hand. Is that a detail in the comic at all? Do you know?
Not from what I remember.
Okay.
I don't know if it's just trying to say that the bullets are supernatural. Essentially,
I was wondering if it's kind of like a holy water kind of situation, or like holy artifact, and because he's got Genesis in him, it reacts poorly to the
could be
blessed bullets. But it seems weird to me that like the force from hell would be wielding holy weapons.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're blessed bullets. I'd say if anything, they're cursed.
Yeah, okay, so that's fair.
I think it might just be. I don't know.
Obviously, the Saint of Killers killed DeBlanc, so it could be hurting Genesis too as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Like there's something even extra supernatural happening to that. So, trying to think of any other thoughts here. Tulip misses the radio report about Anvil.
Yeah, they keep somehow missing out on this.
They keep missing out on it in the first episode, so it's just kind of, you keep thinking like, what's going to happen? Are they going to want to wheel up and turn around? Like what effect is it going to have on them? And we can talk more about that later. And then other than that, the Saint of Killers ripping that tongue out.
Pretty gross. Also, kind of, I mean, obviously unnecessary, but in the book, he doesn't really go out of his way to kill anybody that's not in his way.
Yeah.
So it's a little, they're kind of adding a new layer of like murder to him that he doesn't necessarily have in the book. He
seems to have more malice in him.
Yes. And in the book, I mean, he'll definitely kill whoever.
Yeah.
That's not what's in question. But this guy was just like a poor old man sweeping the sidewalk.
And I wanted to kind of ask you about that. We see the poor old man struggle with telling, like, the Saint of Killers asks him, where did he go? And the struggle that's on the gas attendant's face is kind of like, I was wondering, does it mean that he knows, but he's been told to or pretend that they're not? Because Jesse tells him, pretend that we're not here.
Yeah.
So do you think that means that the gas attendant knows and is trying to fight against the fact that he can't physically tell?
I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not like he erased his memory. He didn't say forget we were here. Or did he?
No, he said pretend we were never here.
Okay.
I think is his precise wording for that scene. So
yeah, I think, I mean, he knows. But
so maybe because of that, maybe that is enough to make the Saint be like, well, I'm going to do some damage to you because you're not forthcoming with all the information.
Right. Does he say, I can't remember, I can't tell you?
He specifically says he wasn't here.
He just keeps saying he wasn't
quotes.
here.
He says he wasn't here.
Okay.
So
yeah, that the rules and everything surrounding how the word is working in the show and how people react to it we're still kind of finding our footing. I think along with Jesse. But that does happen in the book where some characters want to do the thing that they've been told not to, or they want to stop doing the thing they've been told to do, but they can't. Yep. And it might show on their face that they're disgusted or horrified, but they just keep doing it.
Yeah. The one other thing that I noted about that, when the Saint is approaching the gas station, but we see the attendant or the owner kind of come out, the sky gets all dark and we see the attendant. He says, "Ginger, where'd you get to, girl?" Like he's seeing a horse or something like that, you know?
I think he's looking for the cat.
The cat
that Cassidy killed.
That makes more sense. I was almost thinking it was like the Saint of Killers' presence is like bringing back old memories of like dead animals or something like that, but
maybe.
Okay.
I mean, that is an old memory of a dead animal, so you're right on the money.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts on the gas station?
Nope.
All right. Act 2, the gang pulls into a garage in Texas and meets the minister, Mike, Jesse's family friend. Mike helps his parishioners get their urges or stop their urges by locking them in a cage in his garage, which Tulip and Cassidy seem to protest, but they ultimately kind of let it go for the most part. Glenn Morshower, good to see him.
Yes.
Fun little role for him.
Yeah.
as like a perverted priest, essentially, a perverted. I would not necessarily perverted, but
just extreme.
Yeah, very, very extreme for sure.
Extreme scholar, religious scholar.
His quote is, "Parishioners need help with their urges: drugs, sex, Twitter."
Yeah,
like that. That to me, and the girl's just like, "I want to Instagram."
It was funny. It was very on the nose.
Yeah,
like, it was very blatant, like exactly who they're making fun of, and which is pretty much everybody in some regard now. But they're going pretty hard for a certain demographic, and I was like, I'll allow it. I laughed, and I was like, I get it. I mean, it's Preacher. They haven't shied away from attacking anybody really yet.
We do get a little bit of Cassidy trying to talk to Tulip about his feelings and kind of like I feel this way. I feel bad about it because I haven't told Jesse. I can't remember. Does this relationship exist in the comic books, at least at this stage? Like, is there kind of a triangle going on, or no? In the beginning.
I would rather not get into it for your sake.
All right, that's fair enough.
We tell you what, put a pin in that. Let's revisit that question later in the season.
All right,
we'll see where it goes in the show.
And that was just kind of a I couldn't necessarily remember if that was too much of an element. I don't know if we've had previous discussions about it.
I don't either.
But
write in and tell us about our own show.
Yeah, please.
Did we
Historians have gone to Texas. Please let us know.
Extreme gone to Texas scholars.
But yeah, that was really all that happened in that short act. But then when we come back in Act 3, Jesse tells Mike about what happened in Anvil. God leaving heaven, Jesse getting Genesis. And Mike claims to have no info about God's whereabouts, but later he tells Jesse he reconsidered a parishioner's story about God walking into her quote-unquote dance hall now that he's heard Jesse's stories. And that means the gang heads over to this dance hall, which turns out to be a strip joint, as the Saint of Killers arrives to find out where the preacher is from Mike, but Mike will not tell him and ends up killing himself before the Saint of Killers can compel him to tell.
Yes.
So interesting to me. Like I remember one of the things that I was thinking as I walk into this season is like, what are normally religious people, because I don't feel like there were many of those in Anvil. What would normally religious people, not that Mike is one of them, I suppose, but he's closer to it, what would they feel about the news that Jesse discovered that God isn't there? And we see Mike kind of be like, well, that makes sense to me because I haven't been hearing him since I've been praying in the recent weeks or months, or however he says. Which is pretty much how Eugene reacts too, right? Yeah, Eugene absolutely says, I'm not hearing God anymore when I pray. So I think if I felt the way about most religious people, the way that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg do, and Garth Ennis, my reaction, what their reaction would be, they would probably deny it and say it's not true. Yeah. And they would probably deny it until they were blue in the face. And that's kind of what I was thinking Mike would do, but it was interesting to see him not head that way. We didn't really get a whole lot of that, because once everybody in Anvil's there to see that God's not in heaven anymore, they all start doing terribly deplorable things. And yeah, which kind of mirrors what Fiore's up to as well. Interestingly enough, I think that if people were told definitively and shown in a way that was irrefutable that God was not in heaven, I think the immediate reaction would be panic and despair, and then whatever actions you take after that are a result of that panic. Yeah. Except for people like Mike, who, and probably people in life who get the most out of religion, are probably people who have kind of an open mind about it, and who maybe know not to just take it at face value, but to really examine it and continuously think about how they feel and how it is working in their life. I think that they might react with a little more rationale, but I think most of the people in Anvil, they only go to church because they think they have to, or because the God obligation. And because God is angry. And if they find out God's not there, they're like, well, shit, he doesn't care. I can do whatever I want. Care. Exactly.
Whereas someone who is more in tune or genuinely in tune with religion would probably try to figure out some way to help. Kind of like Jesse wants to do. Like Jesse's initial goal is to figure out what's the matter. And I think he concludes season 1 pretty much by saying, if we can't help him or if he won't let us help him, then we kick his ass. Yeah, exactly. Whereas in the book, that's not his goal. His goal is just to kick his ass and make him explain why he bailed in the first place. Yeah. He doesn't care what's wrong. You're God. It's up to you to fix it is kind of his stance. And I'm going to, beat your ass and send you back up there to make it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike's reaction is kind of like I feel like there are some people that would be like, well, God does exist then. Like, if he's not there, then he's a real thing. And it kind of validates.
That's true.
As well. So it's kind of interesting to see how different people are taking that news. One of the quotes that I really enjoyed was from Mike. He said, "Do you ever consider if the good Lord's gone missing, then maybe he has a reason?"
Yes.
It's just kind of like it's piquing my interest in the mystery again. Like, why did God leave?
And I think someone says that to him in the book as well.
Yeah.
I think, oh man, I wish I could remember. But I know that Jesse's reaction would just be, I don't give a good shit what the reason is.
Mm-hmm.
You got some explaining to do.
Yeah. And the Saint of Killers killing Mike. More death from the Saint of Killers.
Yeah. And again, it's a little, I don't want to say it's unmotivated, but it just feels a little out of character. I feel like he'd be like, I'm not going to tell you. He would just shoot him in the head and walk away. Like, he wouldn't be like, I can make you tell me. Like, is he going to torture him? I mean, I don't remember. This is bad that I actually don't remember this, but it's one of those little details. I don't remember how the Saint of Killers finds him in the books, but I don't think it's from following the word. I think he just always knows where he's at. Like, I think he's always attuned to him, and he's just following him
on foot.
Yes. Oh yeah, on foot. And so there will be these huge lapses in time. I mean, huge relative in the time of the book, but where they'll go without seeing him, and then you'll see a panel of him or something still walking, and you're like, oh God. And then maybe a few issues later, he'll roll up, and it's always at like a really inconvenient time.
That's awesome.
Oh, it's great. I'm telling you, it is so good. Whenever you'll feel it, you'll be like, oh man, this would be a great time or a terrible time for the Saint to arrive. And then he does. And you're like, oh God, he caught him again.
That's wonderful.
I feel like he just wouldn't waste time.
Yeah.
And maybe he's just not as powerful in a way where he's attuned to him, where he needs to follow a trail. I don't know. Well, what to say? It doesn't bother me that much. It just feels a little like in a way, like kind of like I mentioned before, they shouldn't worry about humanizing him, but by giving him these limitations, they kind of are. I mean, he should literally be unstoppable. Yeah. And like you can't stop him. Like right now, Jesse could be like, oh, I'm going to stop using the word, and you could effectively stop him. Like he won't be able to find you. And that shouldn't be the case necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty worrisome to me, especially because I can feel like there's situations that might arise later where Jesse does use the word. Not only is it limiting when Jesse can use the word, but it also means that if the first time that he uses the word and the Saint doesn't show up,
well, they're
breaking their own rules.
He can't teleport there. He does have to walk.
He can't teleport there. He does have to just walk there essentially, which is like getting GPS pings every 10 days about where somebody is essentially.
Right. So say Jesse goes a week without using it, and meanwhile they just drive. What's this Saint going to do? Is he just going to be like, well, last he was here, so guess I'm just going to hunker down here.
And that's the thing. It's like I never feel like the Saint would just hunker down. He's probably just constantly
on the move,
moving in the general direction that he thinks Jesse's going.
That's what I think is so sweet about it in the comics is like he will always head towards you. Like, and you just gotta try to get some sleep and know that he's just moseying on towards you.
I like that more, but and I feel like the show is still kind of portraying that in a way, but maybe we'll get to something later where it turns out that the word is not the only thing that.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that more in episode 2. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Act 4, we get the gang rolling into the strip club to talk to Mike's parishioner, Tammy, who manages the club. She confirms that God came in, but really only to listen to the music. Tammy gets killed by her security guard as he's tussling with Cassidy, and the gang leave. we get to see that whole Cassidy thing unfold on the cameras behind them.
Yes.
Which is a beautiful little touch.
It's great. It's distracting, but it's good.
Yeah.
I found myself being torn between my desire to watch the monitors and watch the rest of the scene. This is my favorite scene of episode 1.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. And I like... I'm trying to think of how to put this. I like when the show gets into these little vignettes of like character moment. And I really, really like, because you feel it. It's like this tonal shift in the show. It's kind of almost like the scene in Drive when he gets in the elevator with her, and the guy who's there to kill them gets in the elevator too. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yep.
And he turns to her as like a distraction, and the lights in the elevator actually dim as like the moment gets a little more intimate.
Yeah.
That moment blew my mind in the theater. I thought that was such a cool touch, and it doesn't make any sense. Like that didn't happen, but it did to them, and I think that that's such a cool way to dial you even more into a moment and pay more attention, like something changed. And the show almost feels like it does that in this scene, and everything kind of the tone shifts for a second.
Tammy's demeanor changes,
and the whole thing kind of realigns, and it breaks away from the kind of bombastic nature of the show for the most part. And even though on the monitors in the background there's this hilarity ensuing, I still was really, really wanted to watch Jesse and Tulip's reactions to what this woman's telling me.
Yeah.
Because even she kind of shifts into this place, and it's kind of like when you're talking to somebody in real life and they're telling you a story, and they kind of transport themselves back there.
Yep.
And you can tell that they remember exactly how they were in that moment, and something kind of shifts in them. And that's exactly what happened here. And I just was absolutely enamored with it. I loved her performance. I loved Dominic Cooper and Ruth Nega's reactions. Those two are so good.
Yeah.
By the way. I feel like we're going to heap a ton of praise on Joe Gilgan, and absolutely.
Yeah.
But they can't be overshadowed.
Mm-hmm.
They're so good. And the way they react to her is really great. But that scene was so compelling. I almost immediately wanted to go back and watch it again, because it was just so cool to watch how when you finally start talking about God, everything kind of changes. And I think that's exactly how it should be. Whenever there's a character who did actually cross paths with him, or whenever, if ever, he does actually show up on the show, the scene should shift as it does in the books. Like when stuff like that happens, like everything should kind of change.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I think, and I might be misremembering this, but they come in to talk to Tammy about God, and at first she's kind of shy about it. She kind of plays it off a little bit.
Yeah, she doesn't want to talk about it.
I think she actually denies it twice until getting that third time where she finally comes through, which is kind of a little bit of a biblical callback in ways of Peter's denial of Jesus. But just her entire thing, it really kind of makes you, like, they're adding this thick layer of fog over God. Not that he needs any more fog, but they're certainly kind of like building the preacher universe as God in a way that feels like very much like he's a character in the story and not just an overall power, like an omniscient, omnipotent being.
Yes.
Which is awesome, and it makes me feel like one day, Colin Salmon's gonna walk up as God. I don't know who it's gonna be.
Colin Salmon.
It could be anybody really, but I would wonder who it would be. Like that.
Now I really want to see Colin Salmon roll up as God. I don't actually want to see that.
So we can Dreamcast God later on.
Well, spoilers for the book.
Yeah.
That aren't really spoiled. He does show up, and initially it's not even his face, and it's so good. It's so awesome. But it'll just be like his arm in the panel, like pointing at somebody, and it's really awesome. But whenever he's illustrated in the book, it is very striking, and it is kind of that vision of what God would look like, sort of, but even more turned up to 11,
like that, like the illustrated Bible, like those kinds of like old artistic.
It is, and he's. I mean, the portrayal of God has always been human, essentially.
Yeah,
and it is kind of, but more so. But the scene, like I said, just changes when he's there. Even if it's just his arm in the scene, or he's off panel talking to a character. It's like the sun just materialized in the room. Like, it's crazy. And it's like everything stops and everyone stops and turns because you're looking on God. And her reaction in the story is in her reaction as she's telling the story is wholly appropriate, because how as a human being do you put that into words, that experience of standing before God and talking to him, or like, and how do you know? That's what I'm curious. She doesn't describe him. And so it almost makes it seem like he walked in and she was the only one who knew it was him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, because that's not what I would have expected. So he seems to be in some sort of human guise, which is interesting too. But I loved that scene.
Yeah.
And I loved the what she says about he came for the jazz. He wasn't here for a girl. I guess does that come? Well, that was in the same.
No,
scene.
that's in the same.
Yeah,
scene,
they theorized that God fell in love with a stripper, which is hilarious. I was like, come on. He's not Fiore. He's not one of the angels.
Yeah.
Which in the books, the angels just descend into pure debauchery, and which is kind of what happens in the show. But that was I was like, no way. That's too simple and stupid. And sure, she's like, he came for the jazz. And I was like, oh, what an awesome line. That's so good. That's so
it's
Preacher.
Pretty awesome.
That's like Preacher is so inherently about these big, broad, like just themes of like America. Like, and a lot of people have said that Preacher was written as like a satire.
Yeah.
And like kind of almost making fun of America, that idea, that John Wayne idea of America.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's true. And maybe Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon have gone on record to say that, but I don't really subscribe to that, because it's handled with so much love that I think they kind of believe in it themselves. And it's one of those things where it's easy to make fun of. Like, it's easy to make fun of people that go, well, America is the greatest country in the world.
Yeah.
But I think as an American, it's kind of instilled in you a bit to kind of feel that way. And at times you can kind of genuinely feel that way. And you do go on that journey with Jesse a lot throughout the book, where he just talks about why America is the greatest country in the world. And a lot of times you can't help but agree with him. Yeah. You're like, he's like, I could just get in my truck and just drive west for 1,000 miles and stop in the middle of nowhere and have a beer and watch the sunset. Yeah, you can do that. You can do that in other parts of the world too, but there's something special about it. I think especially when you're in the American West, that it's been so heavily romanticized, which is great. I love Westerns, and maybe that's part of why I like Preacher so much. But the scene and the notion that God came for the jazz is another one of those big, like very romantic ideas of what God would want to do on Earth, and I just like totally love that. Love that idea.
That's cool.
Because what else would God be interested in on Earth?
Yeah.
Like you don't really know why he's here yet.
It's almost like the jazz thing. Like I feel like I can envision a scene where they talk about this, and God's basically just like, that's the one thing that I didn't anticipate. Essentially, like him being interested in it because it's not his own vision.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
That was the note I had, where it reminded me a lot, not to necessarily jump into another comic for comparison, but it reminded me a lot of Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, when he realizes again why humans are special. Yeah. When he realizes that the unlikely coupling of the comedian and the original Silk Spectre resulted in Laurie, who he loves. And he realizes that of all the possible combinations of all of the millions of endless DNA sequences that could have been, she was the one that happened. Yeah. And she happened and had a meaningful impact on him. And then he realizes the miracle of creation and chance and random. And suddenly his faith in saving humans has been restored. That is one of the few scenes that is better in the Watchmen movie than it is in the book. And it's amazing in the movie. And it's all because of Billy Crudup. So shout out to Billy Crudup, star of Alien Covenant. And... Almost Famous, which also stars Noah Taylor, who is in this show later, apparently. And it reminded me of that because I think, like you said, God, actually also in Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan, when he's in the final kind of conflict, he has a line to the villain where he says, I almost forgot the excitement of not knowing, or the anticipation of not knowing what was going to happen. Yeah. And I think that's pretty much, like you said, what God would see in jazz.
Well, and to touch on our own cultural touchstone that we keep, that is lifted. My belief in this is apparently unknowingly lifted from Tron Legacy. It's Flynn with the ISOs saying it's biodigital jazz, man.
Yep.
That's exactly what it is. So that's a very enticing thing.
Exactly, and it's great in Tron Legacy because you have this guy who's this incredible programmer and coder and creator who can create these amazingly complex beings, and yet when something manifests itself out of nowhere and it's jazz, essentially. What a wonder that must be to behold.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing God can't really account for. And I think a lot of what Preacher is about and a lot of how the angels feel and a lot of probably how God feels is that humans are kind of a failure. Like we're a blown experiment. It's kind of also kind of like Prometheus and Alien Covenant, if you want to go into that world.
Yeah.
But like we were kind of a mess, and we squandered our gift and our potential, and we've been reduced to, if you take the denizens of Anvil, for example, just waste.
Yeah.
And to think that God would come down and he could find the beauty in something humans created like jazz is just so good.
Yep. I hope we're right.
Hey, and you know what? I don't care.
Yeah, we found it.
Yeah, if we were to get a tweet from them saying, so you guys are off, sorry, I'd be like, it doesn't matter though, because that's really what I got out of that scene, and it made me feel better about our standing in the universe again, to think like, you know what, because at the end of the day, we do create stuff, and it's even if your creation is terrible, which a lot of creations we reviewed on these previous shows have been, it's still a creation. It's still something original, or maybe a little derivative again in the case of a lot of those things.
There's something about it.
But yeah, just music, and music is in a way like the ultimate kind of, people hear a song and it will do a million things to a million different people, and that's just the beauty of the universal language, which is music and not math, damn it.
Yeah.
But what a great scene.
Absolutely.
Loaded scene.
Absolutely.
For as throwaway as someone might have been like, yeah, she didn't tell him and she got shot.
Yeah.
I think there's so much going on in that scene, and it was just masterful.
The only other thing that I want to bring up is this is also kind of the counterpoint to earlier with Tulip saying that Genesis brings the fun out of everything. She and Jesse argue about using Genesis to learn more about, and like to learn from the lady what God was there for, and so this is where the actual moral part of it comes in, her being like it's an invasion of my will and body, essentially, and I think I'm wondering how more and more that will come to play in the season. I even started writing out some of the questions that I thought we would have at the end of these two episodes, and one of them gets answered in season 2 or in episode 2. Essentially, of why is Tulip will Tulip always be morally opposed to the use of Genesis? And we get an early mention in the second episode that we'll get to shortly. But any other thoughts?
No.
All right, Act 5. The gang rolls into the Relax Inn for the night. Jesse and Tulip work out their frustrations, so to speak, as Cassidy sees a familiar face playing the amazing Ganesh on the television show. On the television commercial at the Mumbai Sky Tower. We didn't see who it was at that point in time. Jesse steps outside to have a smoke and sees the Saint of Killers approaching him, and Jesse attempts to use Genesis to get him to stop, but it doesn't work, and the Saint pulls a gun on him. And that's the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's not a whole lot to get into, especially seeing as we're going to pretty much move right into the second episode, but... Did you know who the amazing Ganesh was going into it?
No.
Okay. I managed to see him in a trailer that made me realize it was going to be him.
Okay.
But you also get a little bit of a profile of his face on the commercial as well when
Gotcha.
Jesse's watching it.
I think I saw a tweet later. I watched episode 2 a little bit later. I think I saw a tweet from Preacher that showed him in the outfit, and I was like, "That's weird." And I didn't put two. Yeah, no. Somehow.
I forgot to mention while they're in the strip club, Tulip ducks another Anvil mention as well.
Yep.
But we'll get some more about that. Any final thoughts about that first episode? I don't know if we need to stop here to recap or kind of clear anything out a little bit, but
the scene in the hotel with Jesse and Tulip. This is the first time that it's pretty much a like we are re-entering our relationship, right?
Yeah, it seems like the first time that like Tulip's not pissed at him for staying in Anvil anymore,
right.
And they're on the road, and so that's it seems even the way that it goes down of like Tulip literally playing hard to get, with locking a door is interesting, not only because that's kind of like ridiculous of beat a door down to come to me, but it makes sense for Tulip. But also
Jesse's... it makes sense for Jesse.
Well, but yeah, that's true. But Jesse's... Jesse could just use the word to get her to unlock the door, but he chooses not to, essentially, which is also kind of a good thing of like, he did it to her in the finale of last season. She slapped him and was like, never do that to me again. And he's listening, at least for now. So
it was a very good encapsulation of the Jesse Tulip relationship where Jesse will break down doors to get to her.
Punch a door with his bare hands.
Yes, it was very good. I was actually like chuckling pretty much the entire time, which is not usually the reaction you get out of like a sex scene, but it's the amount of sex they have in the comic is ludicrous, and it's hilarious, and it's very much like a staple of their relationship that they just... Jesse is just a passionate guy, and his love for her is without equal. And so it was very cool to watch that scene of him like punching the door down. It was great.
Yeah.
I was like, this is very good. And it was sweet. I liked her kind of laughing at it and had that smile creeping across her face from the other side of that door because she's like, I got him back. And it's great. I really liked it. I was happy for them in that moment. It was very cool.
The only other thing that I wanted to bring up was the scene of killers walking underneath the streetlights.
Oh, so good.
It was awesome.
Awesome. It reminded me of, this is so weird because it couldn't be the more opposite, but there's this really awesome camera test online. They did a test with a Phantom, which is like a
10,000 frames per second.
Incredibly high-speed camera. Yep. They did one where they rigged a Phantom to like a dolly track that runs parallel to this like long field.
Yeah.
And they rigged lights every like, we'll say like 15, 20 feet like that, looking straight down. And then they put a camera at the far end. I think it was another Phantom, just at the end. So it was facing straight down the line, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they have a cheetah, like a captive cheetah, and they loose it. And the dolly, it's like a roboticized dolly with the camera. It moves along the course that the cheetah runs at the same speed, so it's moving parallel to the cheetah.
Yeah.
And there's the camera at the far end the cheetah is essentially running towards. And this cheetah they shot it like at night or in the evening, so they have all these lights positioned like that. And it reminded me a lot of that for some reason, because the cheetah just runs in and out of these lights at like thousands of frames a second, and you can see every muscle and every sinew in this cheetah, and it's unbelievable. But it's from when they cut to the far camera, it's really cool because it's essentially the same effect. You see it dipping in and out of these lights, and you're thinking that thing's running at like 70 miles an hour, and they're able to capture it.
That sounds awesome.
It's really cool. I would recommend looking it up.
Very cool.
But the Stand of Killers is the opposite of a cheetah in that he can't be stopped and he's very slow. And for some reason, it still reminded me of it, though. I just in that moment, I was like, man, this reminds me of the camera test. It's cool. But it's a really cool shot. It also kind of reminded me of Road to Perdition. Have you seen Road to Perdition?
Yeah, a long time ago, though. But the which part?
It's the part where Tom Hanks catches up to Paul Newman.
Okay.
Do you know which scene I'm talking about? It's like it's in the
rain. I can't remember
exactly.
Okay. I do remember the rain. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not at all the same effect, but for some reason it reminded me of it. I don't know why. But that kind of high key, like overhead lighting is really, really cool and really moody. And watching him come in and out of those streetlights was just really neat.
Although part of me was like, I feel like I've never seen a street where streetlights are that close together.
And there's that many of them.
There's that many of them, and they're that bright.
In like Texas. Yeah. Good points, all. But it was very cool.
For a wrap up on that first episode, you texted me, and you and Lance watched the first episode together. You said we both audibly gasped at one point.
Yes.
As a reference to events that are yet to come. Can you give me just the least spoilery what part you were talking about? Yeah.
And you probably didn't even read into it, or
it might have just sailed past.
Absolutely.
Me,
even though they draw pretty clear attention to it, when Jesse is at Mike's house.
Oh, I did. So there's all right. Yeah, I totally forgot to talk about this, but the Tulip's looking at the book of photos, and we see her talking about. Am I headed in the right direction?
Go on.
So Tulip's looking at photos of Mike turned out to be the officiant or whatever at Jesse's parents'.
Yes.
Jesse's parents' wedding.
Yep.
And so the Key and Tulip and Cassidy talk about it a little bit, but one of the questions that I came out of it was Cassidy's like, there's not much family there. And Jesse's like, well, there wasn't a whole lot of family on my father's side, and my mother's side wasn't invited.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my questions was, why weren't the Langelles invited to Jesse's wedding?
You are on the right track.
Yeah.
However, it goes deeper than that.
Okay.
And I wish I could remember the question that somebody asks about. Maybe that is the question. Maybe Jesse says, somebody asked him a question. And it's a shot of Jesse, and he's on the left side of the frame, and the fish tank is behind him.
Okay.
And you see somebody asks the question. Oh my God, I'm kicking myself for not going back and rewatching it to hear what it was. But you see Jesse thinking about the question, and he either gives no answer or a very brief answer. But in the background, you see in the aquarium, you see the little treasure chest that's always in aquariums.
Yeah.
You see its lid open, and like the bubbles come out, and it makes like a horrible sound. That's the reference. And Lance and I both looked at each other and went, "Oh!" and like made this crazy sound.
So is it the treasure chest itself, or is it the question too?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's,
all right.
It's kind of everything in that moment, and it's such a blatant reference that it's almost comical because the camera even like rack focuses to the fish tank, I think.
Interesting.
And if you know, and you made a noise also. Don't lie. Any listeners out there who have read the book, you made a sound, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But it's I can't wait. I just can't wait for more. Like that's the thing. We're in the books now, but we're still not. Like they've already just gone and like made a left turn, and they're detouring already to see the world's biggest ball of yarn. Like they've already got their eyes caught by some other attraction, and they're heading that way. So there's an arc that happens so early, and I've already made reference to it, and it's just so awesome and important to you understanding Jesse that they just need to get to it.
Interesting.
But the questions you pointed out and the photo album and all that, those are direct references to that. Yes.
Okay. And that, my kind of inkling here, and you don't have to react. I'm not even going to look at you when I say this. Is that I'm wondering if the Langelles are connected to that tattoo on Jesse's back, and maybe the people that might have been there when John was.
Don't look at me.
Was murdered, but yeah. So
you looked at me.
I did.
You probably regret it.
But yeah, no. First episode.
You're being a good watcher. You're watching the show and you're paying attention to the right details.
It's honestly, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and Westworld have all trained me to
know that the devil's in the details.
To know that the devil's in the details for sure. And a lot of and with the new format that I'm doing here, where I'm just writing a couple sentences to sum up that act break, I'm missing some of the things, but I'm glad that you called me back to that photo album because I did write notes about it for sure.
Yep, that was important, and I'm really glad we went back to it because this would not have been a good episode had we glossed over that.
Very true.
Oh boy, I got to rethink this whole new format. I'm just kidding.
I'll figure it out. I just got to get back into the swing of things.
I didn't look at my notes either, and that's my fault because I did have that in my notes.
Okay. So yeah, episode 1. I think that's about it. Unless you have anything else.
Nope, I'm good.
Check your notes. All right. Episode 2, Mumbai Sky Tower. The teaser opens up with the Saint of Killers rolling up to the Relax Inn to kill Jesse, but he's met with several difficulties. Essentially, it comes down to the gun enthusiast club that is there. Jesse uses them to fight against the Saint of Killers. During the gunfight that ensues, the gang learns that Anvil has exploded in a TV news report, and they try to take time to not reminisce, but just process it. But they end up getting interrupted by the gunfight that's ensuing, and they try to hide in a vending room. An unhappy patron draws attention towards them. Jesse uses Genesis to quiet him, but it appears that the Saint of Killers knows when Genesis is being used, and the crew escapes via a window in the room and speed off into the night as the Saint of Killers yells in frustration. More Saint of Killers action.
Yep.
I was wondering if you could comment on a little bit the idea of that. So we're at the end of the first episode, that same situation. Jesse's standing there, plain as day, in the middle of the night, with the Saint of Killers on the other end of him. And we've seen this guy shoot people from this far away.
Yes.
The idea that a truck suddenly pulls in front of Jesse kind of struck me in a sense of like divine intervention. Did you feel that way at all? It feels like that truck comes out of nowhere. Obviously, it's kind of one of those things where you want to be tricked by the car crash that's happening in the show almost.
Mm-hmm.
What did you feel about that?
I didn't read too much into it. I think
Okay.
I would not say it's divine intervention per se.
Yeah.
Maybe it is in this show. I thought it was more just dumb luck or not great writing. Had there been like a major intersection there, I would have bought it more.
Yeah.
Honestly, the thing that left me I almost said mumbied, more bummed out about that whole sequence was when the truck hits the Saint of Killers and pins him to the telephone pole. And I was like, no.
That wouldn't happen. He just keeps going.
Well, the truck would fold around him. Like, he
just cuts the truck in half.
He has some very noteworthy vehicular interaction in the book, and it's always awesome, and it's like running into a building. Like, he will not move.
Interesting.
And it's awesome. And so as soon as that truck was going for him, I was like, here we go. And then instead it like moved him back a few feet and pinned him to the pole briefly. I was like, oh, that's not what I want. And the scene I'm thinking of in particular, if it happens, I will lose my mind because it's so cool.
That's awesome.
But he's just not human in any regard in the book. Like things that you would instinctively try to throw at someone like that, they try and they just have hilariously no effect.
Speaking of that, so the gun enthusiasts run out. There's obviously tons of guns shooting at him. They're doing nothing. They're disintegrating on his chest, essentially. And then the girl fires a grenade at him. Explodes, and they all like sing in triumph. And some of the quotes that I caught were, "What can't guns do?" And "Another problem solved by guns," which I just felt was
Did Trey Parker guessed right this episode?
Potentially, yeah. They just
that's hilarious. Though that's like Grand Theft Auto 5 ambient dialogue. Yeah,
for sure.
That's great.
But then the smoke clears and
he like flexes and all these bullets fall off of him and hit the ground, which is cool.
Yep.
Because that feels more accurate. They wouldn't pass through him.
Nope.
They would just flatten on him. Probably.
Yeah,
like Superman.
As he's getting hit by them, it just looks like a bunch of dust is flying off of him.
Yeah.
It's almost like the bullets disappear.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. And
there's such a good scene in the book, and I wish so badly I could talk about it, but I just can't. And it's not because it's a spoiler. It's just so unbelievably awesome that if it happens in the show, I don't want to ruin it for you. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen and you ever read the book, I want you to experience it
on my own,
because it is so incredible. And the one-liner that the Saint throws out is just, it's one of the top 5 like preacher quotes. It's so awesome.
That's great.
It's like people have to have tattoos of it somewhere because it's such a great line. But this scene kind of reminded me of some of those exchanges that he has later where like big mobs of randoms try to take him down.
Yeah.
And they're always the most entertaining scenes in the book. I hope that happens a lot more on the show where just like cannon fodder gets thrown at the Saint of Killers and he just has his way with them. It's awesome.
And that'd be kind of funny now that you're saying that, the idea that like there was, I mean, they showed it in the first episode as well, but then Jesse seeing that it's the Gun Aficionados Club happens to be at the hotel. Like if things like that keep popping up, that's pretty funny to me too. Like if there's a rule of threes there where we get another gun owners thing at some point.
It's like just a convention at a mall or something. Giant. There's like 3,000 people.
Gun and knife show or something like that. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Oh,
that'd be so good. There is a good scene in the book where, again, another slaughter is happening like that, and a character has like a knife, and they try to stab it on the Saint of Killers, and it just breaks off on his face. Like the handle, they go for his face.
Yeah.
And it just like literally shatters. It's so awesome.
That's great.
So yeah, we need more of that. I need the Saint is awesome, and I'm not displeased, but I want him to get to that level of just like there is absolutely no dealing with him. The only thing I am a little hazy on it. I asked Lance, and he couldn't remember either. I think in the comic the word works on the Saint of Killers.
Interesting.
I think it does. And I could totally be wrong, and just think that maybe because he and Jesse have some conversations in the book, and I don't remember if the word works on him or if he just listens to him.
Yeah, he stops killing everything for a second.
Right. Yeah, because the Saint's ultimate goal is not to kill Genesis or Jesse. It's to find some level of redemption or revenge.
Yeah.
For what happened.
Yeah.
So in the book, I think eventually Jesse somehow
learns about that.
Right. And tells him
tries to use it against him.
Yeah. And I don't remember if he uses it to just tell him to stop and listen.
Yeah.
Because Jesse Custer is the kind of character where he wouldn't be satisfied like telling a saint to put his gun to his head and blow his own brains out. I think he'd be like, what's the matter with you? Why are you following me? He'd listen to the guy, hear his story, and then decide what to do.
That's fair, yeah.
So, I could be wrong. I probably need to go reread it again before this season is over, but to brush up on some of that. But anyway.
Yeah. Anything else on the on that teaser, opening teaser?
No, the guy who wanted root beer was kind of funny. Yeah. And I also...
With his arm blown out.
Liked that he was dissatisfied with ginger ale, and I was 1,000% Cassidy in that scene going, ginger ale is actually really good. As I love ginger ale. I would have been me going, hey, man, Werner's over A&W any day.
For sure.
I have such an unrivaled love for Werner's. It's so
Werner's
good.
is beautiful. And if anybody here doesn't know what Werner's is, because it was mostly a Midwest thing for a long time.
Yeah, largely a Michigan thing.
Find some Werner's.
Find some Werner's. There's actually a Werner's machine in Parks and Recreation.
You need to be like the Saint of Killers, finding a can of Werner's.
Track down some Werner's, and then drink it as it is, au naturel, chilled. But then, what do you do next with it? You can mix it with like some whiskey if you want, or blend it with some vanilla ice cream. Make yourself a Boston Cooler.
Boston Coolers.
And just make sure you're sitting down before you drink it because you're going to lose your mind. It's so awesome. There's a Werner's machine in Parks and Recreation. I forgot. And we've been rewatching it, and I saw it in the background. I was like, there's a Werner's vending machine. It's literally a vending machine with Werner's on the side. And I was like, oh, God, I want that in my house, my basement.
Whatever PA came up with that one is...
They know. They know the Midwest. They're like, what would
Indianans
have of Werner's machine?
The one other thing I wanted to note that I just realized is that we didn't get the title sequence for the show, which they didn't come in until a few episodes into season 1, and maybe with this one, I don't know if they did it as a 2-part because they just couldn't edit down the pilot or something like that.
Honestly, I don't miss it. I'm fine without it.
Yeah, it's really kind of largely unimportant, but I just thought it was interesting that maybe they've abandoned it.
I like just the big preacher words, and that's it. Like, just move on.
That kind of overlays on the scene happening.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's good enough. Let's stick to that, guys.
Yep. Act 1, Cassidy reveals the whereabouts of Fiore from the commercial as the Amazing Ganesh. And following the events of season 1, Fiore, they flash back essentially showing Fiore trying to kill himself, but he can't die because he reinvigorates as an angel. So he constructs a Vegas/casino act where he kills himself for the pleasure of others, essentially almost like a magic show.
Yes.
Some good cultural references by Cassidy here in terms of being... he's like, this cowboy is one of 3 things. He's either the Terminator from Terminator 1, the Terminator from Terminator 2, or Nazgul, a Fell Rider from Lord of the Rings, which I enjoyed those pretty well, especially because it comes to the point where he's like, oh, I have somebody that's going to help us, and then just is like, if you say Gandalf, I'm going to hit you. I like that.
It was good, and I actually had in my notes before that scene that I was reminded of Terminator 1 during the motel sequence because there's a scene where the Terminator comes to the motel.
Yep.
And it did remind me a lot of that.
That's awesome.
And it's, maybe that's why, I love the original Terminator. I love Terminator 2 as well, but Terminator 1 for some reason is my favorite.
Yeah.
Even though objectively 2 is the better movie. But maybe that's why I like the scene. I think just that idea of that unstoppable force is really compelling. Even though it's so boring. It should be really boring, but they find a way to just make it so interesting. It's something about that character is just great.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that was a great
little exchange.
That was a great exchange. Cassidy's funny because in these scenarios, he doesn't necessarily have as much at stake because it's debatable whether or not he can die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, the Saint of Killers could kill him.
Yeah.
He could plug him with a bullet and he'd go down. So I guess there is that. But he has a different vibe on life, I think, than everybody else does.
Yeah.
So he can take the moment to reflect on which fictional character is he most like.
And it's also funny to me that he tends to be the most culturally in tune of of the group.
He has wasted the most time of all the characters on the show, yeah. He's watched the most movies while stoned.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, the Nazgul part was really funny. Mm-hmm. The fact that he called them by like
Fell Riders.
Yes, exactly. He knows. Like he's read some Tolkien. He probably knew Tolkien.
He knew Tolkien.
Yeah. He toked with Tolkien.
Yes. We did get a little shot of Fiore looking at a photo of him and DeBlanc, almost like they were together or a couple. Did you see that?
Yes.
I think I talked about the Reddit theory last year where basically somebody was like, I think, because you explained that in the book, Genesis is the product of an angel and a devil.
Yes.
But some people were thinking that Fiore and DeBlanc are the parents of Genesis in the show.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think it's true, but it is interesting.
But yeah, I guess it's not. If they reveal that DeBlanc was actually a devil or something, like who, I don't know who or why or how that would come up anymore now that by the end of this episode Fiore's gone. But
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they have a pretty odd relationship in the first season. I didn't really necessarily make any sort of romantic connection.
Yeah.
They just seemed like buds that are a little... They don't conform to our ideas of good friends because they're angels.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't know things like shame or boundaries because they're angels. And I think that a lot of what happens to Fiore in this episode and a lot of what he chooses to do with his time are representative of how an angel would feel on Earth.
Yeah.
And learning to feel what it is like to be human. So I guess I never really read into it in any sort of romantic sense, but I'm also carrying with me a little bit of what they are in the book, which is just like coworkers, essentially.
Yeah.
Who together are on Earth and kind of get into just like this like spiral of debauchery together. I think it's the two of them, and there might be a third. No, I think it's just the two of them by the end. But so I never read into it in that regard, and there's still a little bit of a weird grayness into exactly what it was in this episode.
Yeah.
Unless I just totally misread some dialogue later, but we'll talk about that, I guess, when the conversation arises.
And we do get introduced to what the amazing Ganesh act is. It's just he was at a lounge singer act and electrocuted himself and then popped up again because he reinvigorated.
Yep.
Which that's pretty funny.
I wonder how
I think about David Copperfield dying on stage. It's basically The Prestige, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. Except way lighter. I wonder what he's doing with all these bodies.
Yeah.
And who in his camp is cool with just being like, yeah, just toss them out back. And when he's doing it initially, is he multiplying all of his chips? Or...
I didn't really necessarily know exactly if he was using that to get all of, like,
I couldn't tell. At first I was like, what is he after him? Because he comes back in the same clothes. So I thought, okay, whatever he has on him, does that duplicate? So I thought, did he win like $5,000 in chips and then he duplicates and turns it into 10 and then 20 and then 40 and then 80? Like, is he just trying to make more money? But then I was like, or is he legitimate? He just keeps trying to kill himself, hoping that it'll take.
I think that to me that was the thing, is that he's so heartbroken about losing his friend that he's just trying to kill himself, and then
and I think his misery is twofold. He's obviously lost his friend, but he's essentially a fallen angel.
He failed at getting Genesis.
Yeah,
back
he's
too,
essentially like a failed angel, a fallen angel at this point. He can't get back to heaven.
Yeah,
he's stuck on Earth,
yeah.
And we know that the angels view Earth as pretty much a cesspool. They don't want to be here. Yeah. And he talks about that later.
Yes, he does.
Which we will also talk about. Keep getting ahead of ourselves.
But yeah, other than that, I don't know that there's too much else to talk about.
The Ganesh act is funny because it's so grotesque. It's just like blatant gore, and people are like, yay.
Yeah, which is very Westworldy. Which is what I was thinking about, the idea that people are like enjoying the death. Yeah,
it's also kind of still in line with that Trey Parker sensibility that like, oh, humans would just eat this up and not care about what's happening.
Yep. So then Act 2, the gang learns about the Saint of Killers from Fiore, and Fiore learns that God has left heaven, but he still will not turn the Saint of Killers off of Jesse because Genesis needs to die. And then also we get a little scene of Tulip and Jesse discussing the anvil explosion because it presumably killed her only family, which was her drunk uncle Walter. And because of this, Jesse ends up proposing to her. So, Yeah, the conversation between Fiore and Cassidy and Jesse, I think, is pretty good. We get this kind of Fiore essentially plainly tells him, I turned the Saint Killers on you because Genesis needs to go. And Jesse obviously wants to put an end to that, but Fiore's just like, no. He's like, I don't give a shit. Which the speech that builds up to, he starts with, as an angel, I never knew what, if anything, that he's like, I only knew peace.
All I knew was peace. Yep.
And then by the end of the conversation, he's like, but I don't give a shit about what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was just a really beautiful, like it crescendos up to what you think is going to be this really meaningful something at the end. And then he's like, I don't give a shit about you.
Yeah, it is meaningful in a way because it's
illustrating his fall.
Yeah, and put yourself in any divine being's shoes in this world.
Yep.
Like part of the reason God leaves is potentially because he looks down on earth and is like, man, what a bummer this all is. Like, I'm done. Wash my hands of it. I'm out of here. And I think that any angel from up there, they're probably like, yeah, whatever. Either they don't care, they're just ignorant, and they're like, whatever, we have the best life ever. I love it. Or any of them turn down and they're like, wow, that sucks down there. I never want to go down there. And whichever camp Fiore belongs to, to actually be sent down there and have to live among it is probably just like repulsive because all they want to do is get home.
Yeah.
And then to be trapped, I mean, he must just feel just so lost. And I like during a lot of that speech, it is starting out, it feels like it's going to be very meaningful, like you said, but for a moment there it is. And then finally he just concludes it with like, I just don't care. He doesn't care anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason he's doing the Ganesh thing is because he has some sort of purpose. People seem to like him. But even that will wear thin, I'm sure, in time.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else that was important in that conversation in terms of the Saint Killers, but
it confirms to the team there that he can track them.
Yeah, due to the word. Yeah, yes. Exactly. So I guess that.
But that's the big nugget they get out of that scene, other than that Fiore is not going to help them.
Yeah. Fiore not helping them leads to Cassidy being like, give me 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is pretty good. The way that the camera slides over to give him that timer, I just really love. Yeah, it's
his little face he makes after that is really good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Tulip kind of waxing poetic about Walter was pretty.
It was a good scene.
It was a pretty interesting kind of like glimpse into her that she like, even though Walter was terrible, the fact that he put any effort into her made her feel special.
Yep.
Because it's something that she didn't get from anybody else, essentially, except for maybe Jesse.
Tulip's family life in the comic is very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's I don't think they're already doing it differently than they were there, but as far as like her relationship with her parents, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes down. But I did really like that scene. It was nice to get that little layer. And again, Ruth Negga is just so good. She is fantastic.
Yeah, I never would have imagined that Preacher by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg would have Oscar-nominated actors involved in it, and she's there. She's one of the first ones, so that's awesome.
I did. Lance did say that while we were watching it. He's like, Oscar nominee when she walked on screen. I started laughing and I said, "Did you see Loving?" He goes, "I loved Loving." And I was like, "You were loving watching it?" He goes, "I loved every minute of Loving." So Lance enjoyed it. You get an endorsement from Lance.
The only other thing so basically when they're laying in bed and they realize that Anvil has exploded, Tulip kind of questions, "So what are we doing? Are we still going after God?" And Jesse's just kind of like, "Well, yeah, as far as I understand, he just has another thing to answer for here. The things that he has to answer for are piling up by the minute."
Yep.
Which, that's a good notion, I think, for them to his renewed motivation to continue finding God. Is pretty good. What did you think about the proposal?
I didn't really like it, actually.
Yeah.
It seems a little early in the show.
It was one of those things where I immediately was like, this is just going to not happen for several reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
You can call it for the bald-faced plot stretching that it's kind of doing.
Yeah, I didn't like that very much.
Yeah. So in Act 3, Cassidy and Fiore go on a drug-fueled bender that seems to end with Fiore almost falling in love or being infatuated with Cassidy, which was great. And I think kind of lends a little bit of credence to the DeBlanc thing, almost.
Yeah.
Like a little bit, but not like, once again, it's mostly that Cassidy is building that special relationship with Fiore, essentially. And then Tulip and Jesse get in line to get married when she spots a man named Gary, who she seems to know from her past. I did note that there was a line here from Jesse. He says it's not like we come from families with great marriages, kind of hearkening back to the photo book that they were looking at a little bit, and just that situation. Cassidy's drugs laid out on the table, I thought was a great little shot there. And one thing that I'm noticing that is really it's a little unfair to Preacher, but with the pedigree of Sam Catlin, some of the best stuff in Breaking Bad was their montages. Set to music, almost always completely dialogueless, like just fantastic. And I feel like this show tries to go on that level, especially with like the drug bender, and I don't think it quite hits it. I think they aim for it, but they're not quite getting there for some reason. I don't necessarily know exactly what it is. Maybe it's just the efficiency with which those montages worked in Breaking Bad. The idea that they want to show you something and get a point across, of like Walter producing insane amounts of meth.
Yeah. Like
that whole kind of thing. I think I would love to see them apply that to Preacher, but I don't think they're quite getting there. I don't know how you felt about that. It's a little, that's not necessarily a montage, but there was another point in the show I think that reminded me of that. But
I can't immediately conjure up an instance in which a montage would be really beneficial to Preacher, other than this kind of sequence.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see a lot of them, and if we do, I'll be pretty surprised. I liked it. I mean, I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
But you are... what you're pointing out as far as like efficiency is an interesting notion, because yes, this montage could have been a lot shorter and gotten the point across.
Yeah.
Like, they got real stoned together and bonded in some way. Got it. It did go on maybe a little bit too long, but I still kind of liked it. And I liked them showing you Cassidy kind of manipulating him and winning over his trust, even if it only took 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And a lot of heroin. Too much heroin initially. Yeah, that was funny. But I did like the bit where they're playing basketball and he asks, like, he's kind of talking about the rules of the Santa Killer, just kind of break the ice and ease his way in. Cassidy would just be the best salesman, basically, as he just works him down into his corner real quickly. But he's like, so what happens if you kill an angel? He's like, you lived in heaven. What happens if you kill an angel? And he says, that's the question, isn't it? And he's like, yeah, it is the question. And you're like, wow. He straight up doesn't know. How terrifying. And like at the same time, how relatable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's great. He straight up, he even says later, like, he hasn't met God. He's heard good things. Like, he doesn't really know.
Mostly.
And yeah, exactly. It was good. It was a good line, a cool little moment of like clarity amidst the haze. And I liked watching the various activities they were doing. It was funny. Like playing Frisbee was cool. It was photographed really neat with all the wide lenses.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I feel like they're using a lot of the visual flair that you would find in those Breaking Bad montages. Yeah. But it's just not quite, it's not as finely tuned as some of those.
I got you.
The next act is when we really get into Gary, so essentially we can talk. Act 4, Jesse has an epiphany about God's love of jazz, but then also Tulip fights and kills Gary because she doesn't want to check in with a man named Victor.
Does she kill him, you think?
I think he's dead.
Okay.
It seemed like it to me, especially with how incapacitated he seemed, and with Cassidy dealing with the situation too. It seemed to me like he was probably dead. I'm glad that Cassidy's just the cleanup guy.
Yeah. I'm not, in a way, actually. That was one of the few things I texted to Lance in between. I was like, 'Cause he was kind of talking about how they were having a lot more fun with the characters this season.
Yeah.
And I said, I can see that. And I said, right now, Cassidy feels like in-between guy. He's like telephone. And
yeah.
I was like, it's okay, but I'm just kind of waiting for a little bit more purpose for Cassidy. But it's okay. For now, his role as like sidekick is about where he should be. So again, I'm just kind of getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I do like that these two characters are both inconsiderate enough to just like dump it on Cassidy and say, Cass will fix it, because he doesn't matter.
Yep.
He's like the lackey. That's good for establishing both Cassidy's role, but also how the other two feel about him ultimately. Yeah. I loved the use of like the like Red Lobster line holder coaster thing throughout the scene. I thought that was so funny that they have that, and I was like, oh, this is what a hilarious gadget. And then the way it goes up at the end of the scene, again, they're putting that clock on these scenes is really, really cool.
And the one thing that I noted about that I was really surprised was not more prevalent was the idea that like if you look at that design, it's got this red heart at the bottom that has, or at the top essentially, that essentially looks like a pair of testicles if you were to flip it upside down. Yeah. And they made the entire back of it pink too. Yeah. So it's a very phallic looking object. And the fact that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg probably thought of that detail and made it happen, but then didn't call attention to it, to me was maybe they're showing a little restraint. I don't know exactly what it was, but
maybe they were just giggling enough at the fact that that guy got beat to death with essentially a giant dildo, vibrating placeholder thing. Yeah, it was really
I couldn't think of what to call it in my notes.
Neither could I. I just always thought of Red Lobster. Was like
that's perfect. I called it the Chapel Censor and a few things of it. Yeah, no, that's
the Chapel Censor sounds like a Cold War thriller, like a Le Carre novel.
Jesse's discussion with Frank Patel. I think that was Frank, right? The lounge singer.
That was an awesome scene.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but also Frank Patel's performance in the earlier scene with Fiore. I like the guy that at the Mumbai, what is it called? The Mumbai Sky Tower. At the Mumbai Sky Tower, they've got their own Indian Frank Sinatra there to croon with at you.
Yes.
But then the discussion of basically being like, Sinatra was. His voice was honey. Yeah. I thought it was that was pretty good.
Yeah, it was a good scene. And again, that was very Preacher. Just these like nuts and bolts conversations about the simple shit like Elvis or Sinatra, those kind of debates that people have in bars surrounded by clouds of cigarette smoke with like cool, moody lighting. Those types of things are very Preacher. And so I really drank in that whole scene. I thought it was awesome. Also, are they allowed to show characters smoking on TV now?
I don't really know.
I thought that was illegal.
I thought it was too, but
because I thought throughout pretty much the whole run of Mad Men, they couldn't show people smoking. They could show them putting out cigarettes. You can show them lighting them, but I didn't think you could actively show them smoking. And I was wondering that because Preacher, he is smoking all the time in the book, and I remember thinking like, wait, we see him outside the hotel putting one out. He like flicks it away. So I was like, I know you can get around it, but in that scene, he straight up just drags off of it, and then we see him exhale it. So I was like, did they lift the rules on this? Do they trust now parents to say smoking's bad?
You shouldn't be watching Preacher, son. I don't know. I don't know if it was just because I remember when that whole thing came about in like the 90s, essentially. It was the idea that Joe Cool, the cartoon camel, was on TV smoking cigarettes, and that would appeal to kids.
Well, and like the Marlboro Man in general is always like this idea of this rugged coolness, guy who just got done with a hard day, and he's gonna have a drag off his Marlboro, and everything's cool.
I don't know if that's explicitly like changed, or if it's just because like looking even at this, I'm at parentstv.org.
Cool.
They have a thing called TV Stubs Out Smoking. Just the real quick log line here is by April 1970, Congress had passed the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act, which banned the advertising of cigarettes on television and radio. The last cigarette commercial aired on January 1st, 1971. Even then, however, characters on TV programs continued to smoke.
Yeah, I thought at some point in the 2000s it was decided that they could not show a character actively smoking a cigarette. You could show them lighting one, and you could show them extinguishing one or holding one, but you couldn't show the act of inhaling the smoke. And then he straight up does. So it just made me wonder.
And so even here it says, today smoking is much rarer on television, with very few exceptions, only done by unsympathetic or disreputable characters.
Interesting. Well, I mean, Preacher without cigarette smoking is ridiculous. Like if he spent the whole show chewing bubblegum, it'd be really different, because he's just part of that character. He's always having a cigarette.
It looks like that may be just like a broadcast thing, but with you saying Mad Men, I don't know.
I could be mistaken, but I thought in Mad Men, I thought I remembered taking note that they were cutting around the smoking. Yeah. They show plenty of drinking. Yeah. There's obviously no laws against that. Yeah. Same in Preacher.
Yeah.
It's just funny. It's a trope of Westerns. You know, cowboys in general are smoking. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not a cigarette smoker. I think I've had like maybe 2-3 cigs in my entire life. And I remember, I think in high school or college, we were talking about this same thing. And I said to Gojo, I was like, but I mean, like, smoking is cool. And he was like, oh, yeah, it is. Like, we fully acknowledge that, like, these cool characters smoke, and it enhances their mystique. It doesn't mean that I want to go do it, but maybe I was just brought up that way to be like, hey, smoking's bad. Don't do it. And I was like, okay. But I'll still say, like, hey, that guy looks cool, striking up that smoke. Yeah. Yeah. And with a character like Jesse, you got to have it. I mean, it's just inherent to the character. But that scene, just drenched in smoke. Yeah. It was really cool.
It was pretty good. And in that bluish light that all the art for this season has been into. Yep. That was really beautiful. I also really like the shot of Jesse having the epiphany. You see the lamp turn on.
Yeah, yeah. Again,
pretty on the nose.
Cartoonish. It got a little silly. Yeah. The first thing I thought of was Home Alone 2, when Tim Curry has that like little epiphany and the light above his head goes ding and turns on. It's so awesome.
I don't remember that. I haven't watched Home Alone 2 in a long time.
Oh, it's so good.
I've seen Home Alone 1 like 40 times since Nicole and I started dating.
Oh, that's good.
I have not seen Home Alone 2.
Home Alone 2 is awesome, and Tim Curry's performance in it cannot be talked about enough.
He's Tim Curry.
It's true.
Yeah.
He's great. Anyway.
Do you know, are you familiar with Victor and Gary? This is a yes or no question.
No. Not that I know of. They may have different names.
Maybe these are people in the comic that are...
Or they were really tiny characters that have been expanded into a bigger capacity.
That's fair. Okay. Good to know. What do you think of the fight between Gary and Tulip? Like her being choked kind of for the first part of it and then finally getting the upper hand.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah. I liked showing that dominance that he had in terms of like just carrying her around while he's trying to get a cell signal. It was kind of funny. I mean, not funny, but it was a clever way to have the fight scene actually have some stakes. And instead of him just like throwing her, and then her scrambling for a weapon and him kicking it away or like punching her in the face. Like I'm glad it was like he was just kind of restraining her, but he was obviously harming her by dragging her through all the decorations of the room and stuff.
Well, and I feel like we've been taught so much that Tulip doesn't take any shit and is gonna
right. Oh yeah,
care. Like the fact that he basically only gets her by catching her on her wares the first time, and then when she finally
and that's what
gets
I
her
thought.
Bearings,
during the scene, I was like, listen. As soon as she gets the opportunity to kill this dude, she's gonna take it. I knew, I was like, he's probably underestimating her willingness to just take him out. Yeah, I thought she would get a hold of the gun and blow him away, but then I was like, how at what point, how are these characters explaining all these situations? But even still, like, you still got a big giant guy laying in the room. Yep, got to handle it. Oh, here comes Cass.
Here's Cassidy.
Take care of it.
Yep. All right, and then finally, Act 5 of Episode 2. Fiore protests any potential use of Genesis while Jesse pledges to use it if it will bring him closer to God, because he believes Genesis was not a mistake and was meant to find him and be used by him. Tulip changes her mind about getting married, and the gang set off on the road once again, with Jesse using the word on Fiore to tell him to find peace and essentially draw the Saint of Killers to him. Fiore, even after agreeing with Cassidy to drop the Saint of Killers from their trail, gets confronted by the Saint, but he decidedly does not tell the Saint to stand down because he believes Genesis needs to die. And he hires him for one last job, which is to kill him on stage as Ganesh in front of the audience. The audience, of course, boos and hates the act because he doesn't come back, which is another
yeah, it was sad. Fiore's fate is a real bummer.
Yeah.
Which is funny because he's not a character I'm particularly attached to, but you do kind of develop a fondness for him.
Yeah.
Because you spend so much time with him and DeBlanc in season 1, and then you realize that Fiore is definitely more the lost puppy of the two.
Yeah.
And without DeBlanc there to kind of help him out, he's definitely just this wayward soul.
For sure.
As soon as Jesse said find peace, I was like, well, that's it. He's going to get killed by the Saint of Killers.
Yeah.
It's the only peace he's going to find.
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah, and the idea that he kind of like he goes back to his room and it's empty with all this fun stuff that he and Cassidy were doing.
That was so sad.
He's sitting at his dressing room table or whatever, and he sees all these notes from like adoring fans, and he still just doesn't care about it at all. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad.
Fiore's kind of not epiphany, but his reaction to all of that, I think, is really important, and it's an important sort of not really a through line, but kind of a theme to the book or Preacher. It's not really a theme so much, I guess, as like a consequence, but there's this idea that gets introduced at some point in the book, and I think it's probably a little bit later on, but kind of the idea that it's all fun and games until it's not, basically. Yeah. And that everything you're doing has some consequences, and every relationship is potentially going to end. And I kind of made that comment towards the beginning of this episode in regards to episode 1, that I thought of that kind of snapshot of the good old days.
Yep.
And inevitably somebody's going to get left behind in the good old days. And like, I think most actual people can look back on like friends they had during college or high school or experiences they had, and there's people that they don't keep in touch with anymore. And sometimes it's just a result of people naturally growing apart, but also like friendships go bad and things can turn sour between people, even people who really cared about each other. And this is obviously not news to anybody.
Yeah.
That is a human. But I think Fiore in that moment when he walks back to his room he's kind of the remnant. Like, he was kind of used for a purpose, and he was kind of a single serving friend, if you will, to Cassidy, and he just got left behind and kind of discarded. And I think that this is something that humans experience, and some people get used to because it's just sort of their lot in life, as horrible as that sounds. And you get thicker skin, and you kind of get accustomed to things like that happening. And I think Fiore is almost like a little kid who that kind of happens to for the first time.
His loss of innocence.
Yeah. And just kind of when he thinks he knows what it's like to be human, and he has this like really kind of crappy life that he's continuing for some reason, he then finds a little bit of fun and like a friend in Cassidy, somebody else who is not really a human. He's a vampire. He's different, and he has different perspective. And he has kind of a kindred spirit in him, and then he again just gets left behind, and they don't invite him along for the road trip. They just go, no, you're not allowed in our group, though. We'll play with you at recess, but screw you once we get out of school. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's just such a bummer. And it's this like, in that one shot of him walking in there and just seeing the mess, all this came crashing down on him. And I think just the weight of like, he almost had some purpose.
Yeah.
And I thought he was going to come with them for a minute, because she's like, you're the angel that's going to help us. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, cool. And I was kind of like, oh, he gets to be in the gang.
Join the crew, yeah.
Nope. You stay here. Thanks for the help, bud. Saint should be here anytime. Just hang tight and then tell him to stop, and we'll be good. Thanks. Later. And they just don't think twice about it. And again, it's one of those, it's like I said, the relationship between Tulip, Jesse, and Cassidy, and the way they kind of view him as like their kind of helper.
Yeah.
That's kind of how they all treat him, instead of treating him like a person and thinking about how he might feel about just being the messenger, and that he really has no purpose. This became his purpose for a minute.
Yeah.
And of course, they're just like, oh, you're going to do that? Cool. Later. And they just think it's going to be fine. And of course he's not gonna. Like, he doesn't trust Jesse necessarily to not use Genesis. And he's clearly not happy. And then to top it off, you told him to find peace. Well, poor bastard just wants to die.
Yep.
What do you think he's going to do? But I think that Fiore really, his little mini arc if it's even an arc so much as to decrescendo, is that he really realized what it meant to be human, is to not only live in a way, but to love, and then maybe to
suffer,
to be unloved.
Yeah.
Yes, to have been cast aside in favor of something else.
Yeah,
which I think is as sad and bleak as that is just a part of life,
yeah.
and it's something that we all get used to. And obviously, we all know the ups and downs of life. But I'm really glad that they went that road with him, because I think part of what makes Preacher so good as this body of work, both in the book and the show, is taking these characters and being able to apply the human experience to them and see how they handle it. And we're running out of heavenly characters here to
yeah.
to slap these ideas on. So we're just gonna have to watch the humans and the vampire deal with it for a while. But I thought that was a really profound moment of him in his dressing room in front of the mirror after that, just kind of staring at himself and like really trying to figure out what he is anymore, and looking, you're right. On the one hand, he has all this fan mail, all these wonderful things, and you can see how even like artists in real life, they might seem to have so much going for them and so much adoration, but ultimately, if their existence doesn't mean anything to them, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And, we see all these horrible things, like all these awful, sad suicides of famous stars and people who overdose. And we always just, like even Chris Cornell relatively recently in Detroit, unfortunately. And you'll see this tremendous outpouring for like a week on Facebook, and then people forget about it.
Life moves on.
People forget about it, and it goes away, which is even also just a giant bummer. Even in death, you'll eventually kind of be forgotten, or at least, pushed to a lower priority. And you just feel really bad, because oftentimes people always say like, oh, it's just so sad. Robin Williams was a huge one.
Yeah.
And that was just, it left a hole in like movies in like Hollywood, because he's been a constant my entire life, your entire life, most of our lives. And then to have that guy go away, and we just all like, oh, he had so much going for him, though. He was so funny. He was so happy. He had a family and all these movies, and he was adored around the world. But he was sad.
He was still, he was depressed.
He was human. Yeah. And we forget, I think, a lot of times that these people are humans. And I'm not trying to compare Fiore to Robin Williams necessarily, but, I think there is a lesson here, kind of writ large, that is going to fly over Jesse, Cassidy, and Tulip's heads. They're not even going to know. They probably will never know until the Saint shows up again. And even then they might not know. But the unfortunate reality is that they just had him to help them, and then they moved on. And this is also something we do, I think, as humans. We don't necessarily always consider how someone else or another party is going to feel about something like this. Yeah. So I think there's a lot going on in that relationship.
For sure.
Which is really sad. But really good.
And looking back over my notes, I don't know if you caught it, because I didn't catch it until I do a second watch of these shows, and I also put on the closed captions. Okay. Which is how I caught the people with the guns in the beginning of the episode.
I meant to do that, and I forgot to put on the captions.
There's a quote when they're getting in the car and they're packing up their stuff. Fiore walks off camera to behind the car, presumably as people are loading their luggage into their car. And you hear Fiore say, "Be careful with that one. It's Cassidy's." Of and it's just after he hugs Cassidy, but his like adoration and feelings about Cassidy
that's funny. No, I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
I did like when Cassidy was hugging him, and he was like, "All right, that's enough of you now."
Yeah.
And I was like, it's funny, but at the same time, I was like, man, what a dick. He just wants to say goodbye to him. He really cares about him, and he's just kind of like, okay, I'm uncomfortable now. Yeah, you need to stop. And it's kind of like it's kind of like Del from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. In the moment, you're like, ugh, God, this guy's the worst. I can't wait to be rid of him. But then you really look back and go, oh, did I really have to say that? Yeah. Could I have held in there for 5 more seconds and let him finish his hug and feel better about himself? Yeah. But again, to err is human.
Yep. We do. There's another little moment here where Jesse is saying that they're going to head to New Orleans, because Fiore does not necessarily pull it out of him, but he does ask him to know that information before he tells the Saint that. Tulip arrives at the same conclusion as Jesse is telling this to Fiore, and we see the tail light of the car pop on, just like the light popped on behind Jesse, which I thought was a nice little detail, some consistency there. And other than that, I don't think there's too much in the second episode to say. I did want to bring up the fact that something that I forgot about in the first or the teaser actually. Tulip, when the gunfight is happening around all of them, is when Tulip says, maybe you should use Genesis right now, or you should use the word. It's kind of that's the question that got answered in the second episode a little bit of like, she does see a very utilitarian, like, we're going to die here, you should use this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but I still think that's going to be a bigger idea that they play with throughout the season as well.
I agree. Yeah.
So the questions that I had kind of written up here: why weren't the Langels invited to Jesse's parents' wedding, which we may hear more about later? Will Tulip always be morally opposed to the use of Genesis? The answer is no, but there's still going to be more on that, as we said. And why doesn't Genesis work on the Saint of Killers is kind of the other thing that I walked out of there with. But
yeah, I'm actually going to go look, because I brought it up, I want to look up in the comic.
Yeah, we can follow up on it next
I want to find
time.
out if it does work on him or not.
Awesome. In general, did you like the 2-part premiere?
I did, quite a bit.
2?
I think that it's simultaneously, it's a lot bigger and a little more silly and crazy, but at the same time, the deep moments, for me personally in particular, the jazz scene with Tammy in episode 1, and then Fiore's whole kind of moment, which, again, I've really zoomed in on and blown up this micro expression into this whole giant thought of what the show is about. But I think that's the point of talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And loading up these scenes with
and both of these
subtext.
Episodes crescendo to those moments, essentially. Yeah. So it's got to be where their intention was.
And I really like that. I think that, the show would not be serving its full purpose or reaching its full potential if it was just about entertaining you. Every episode should leave people thinking about how they feel about life and religion and existence, and also maybe what they're doing right, maybe what they're doing wrong. Like, I think it's a big important part of Preacher. And it's if you're just watching it and you think, hey, it's just a fun show, by all means, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of depth,
a lot more subtext there.
There's a lot of subtext, and there's a lot that you can take out of it and carry with you into the world, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that we also experienced a lot of that in Westworld to an extent when we were talking about that show.
For sure.
Which you should check out if you haven't watched Westworld.
Absolutely.
Please do.
Westworld.fm. Go check out our Westworld.
Yeah, also listen to us, but watch the show because it's
also fantastic.
It's a pretty seminal work.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be talked about for a long time. So
totally.
We will continue to talk about it for a long time.
For sure.
As long as it's on.
Yeah, I enjoyed the 2-part premiere. It's got me excited to be on this journey. I'm glad Preacher's back.
Me too.
Especially since we won't get any Westworld for a while as well.
Yeah, that's true. We'll probably get 2 seasons of Preacher in the time it takes to get Westworld.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's nothing else on TV like it, and there's nothing else in the comic world like it. So I do remember somebody wrote in last season, and you had mentioned maybe reading the book or something, and somebody wrote in and said that they like the show's format as it is.
Yep.
And you said, never mind, I won't read a new Preacher.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of what makes our show unique, is that we are coming at it from very different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
I've been considering having us do this with the Alienist as well. I don't think Alex is necessarily as on board.
No, I think I'm on board with it. It depends on how things shake out
schedule-wise. Yeah, of course. Yeah, we don't want to take too much on, but it would almost be the same show in a way, except very different subject matter. So we'll see.
The Alienist, for those who don't know, or maybe you're unaware that it's being adapted to be a TV show on...
I've told my dad twice and he's forgotten both times.
Is it FX or is it TNT?
I think it's TNT.
So TNT's adapting a book called The Alienist, written by Caleb Carr.
Yes.
And we are considering doing a show on that. So if you want that to happen, if you're a fan of that show, or you're not, or of that book, or maybe you just want to hear more of our voices, let us know if you would listen to it, because we're certainly investigating the possibility, and that should be happening later this year. But
yeah, we'll also probably do something regarding the Dark Tower.
Yeah. Maybe on the Film Nerds feed.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So,
how much have you gotten through?
I haven't moved.
You've been audiobooking it, right?
I was trying to do both. I try to, like, if I really want to comprehend something, I've been reading it and audiobooking simultaneously.
Really?
It actually helps me fully comprehend it. Actually, the Amazon Kindle app on iPad if you own the audiobook, will play it and highlight the words as you go along.
It will read to you?
Yeah. It teaches you how to read. No, it just
it's
actually
phonics.
reads to you.
You're hooked on phonics.
For sure.
Amazon phonics. That would distract me. Oddly enough, I would need one or the other. You know what I mean?
I get that, but I
want to try it. Actually, I kind of want to try it out to see how it goes.
It's just about the only way that I can even start to grasp at the idea of comprehending.
I'm really glad that you are giving it that attention and not just listening to it in the car or while you're on the treadmill or anything, because that with something like that, with a show like ours, you can listen to while you drive or something like that. But an actual work of fiction like that, it's better.
That's kind of that's why I don't listen to as many audiobooks as I would want to.
I gotcha.
But anyway,
so you were still on the first book.
Yeah, I'm still working on the first.
Yeah,
book.
Tim read all 7, I think.
Yep.
I believe Willie has read all 7.
Yeah.
I was rereading them and I got midway through 4, and then I think I stopped. I got distracted by something. I think I switched gears and tried to do American Gods instead.
Okay. Yeah.
I just haven't finished that either. Oh well. Now I got to reread Preacher.
We will maybe be doing something about the Dark Tower. We will let you know if that pops up, because I think this show will just about be ending around the time that the movie comes out on August 4th. I don't know when the season finale.
Yeah, so we're gonna have
scheduled.
11 more weeks of show.
Yep. At least plus maybe one more first season wrap up show as well.
That's
so
true. We'll figure it out.
Something like that. But anyway,
it's gonna be a good summer.
We're both happy to be back.
Yes.
We want to hear more from you. So as always, once again, you can find more episodes of our podcast on g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play Music. We're G2T Podcast on Twitter. And you can email us, g2tpodcast@gmail.com, to tell us what you think of our podcast and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on our show. Send us corrections, observations, or anything regarding Preacher or our podcast. The Midwest Podcast Network has other shows about video games, horror movies, and HBO's Westworld. Find out more about these shows as well as how to support the network at MidwestPodcastNetwork.com. And finally, of course, our theme music is the song All In by The Red Thread, and it is being used under a non-commercial Creative Commons license. But Nick and I are excited for Season 2 of Preacher.
Absolutely. It's off to a great start.
So until the next episode, go forth and speak the good word.